Okay, so we're going to be looking at Singh Song by Daljit Nagra. Again, pretty quick, just a sort of a quick revisit or a fast initial teach. As usual, we're going to go through what happens in the poem, the most important context points for AO3, the key feelings and ideas, which gets us marked for AO1, and then the best quotes to analyse the language of. Before we look at the poem more specifically, just to say this feels very different to the other poems in the cluster. It's a light-hearted, it's a comedic poem, whereas some of the other poems are dealing with really quite serious issues. This one isn't as much. However, it is a really, really useful poem because it has some family relationships in there and also some more romantic relationships that we can touch on, and therefore becomes a poem that could probably connect to a significant number of the other poems. It's not necessarily one of my favourite poems, if I was totally honest, but it's a really, really useful poem in the sense that it allows me to make links across the cluster to lots of other poems and therefore makes it really, really useful. Okay, so key context that's getting me marks for my AO3. This poem explores the experiences of first generation immigrants and their children. This more focuses on the children, so the children of immigrants but born in this country and their experiences, which is very much what this poem's touching on, but also is playing with the stereotype of the hard-working Indian shopkeeper and other stereotypes that we might have had about Indian people, I guess mostly in sort of 1970s, 90s, 1980s. But those are the kind of key ideas that are running in the background of the poem. Poem 2 on, but I would ask you to take a couple of minutes just to give it a quick read. I don't think it would be a good idea for me to be attempting the accent, so I'm going to leave you to read that, but definitely give it a read, and then we'll start to look at what it's all about and our different assessment objectives. Okay, so what's it about? This poem is the story of a shopkeeper who's running one of his dad's shops. So we get the idea that his dad owned multiple shops and he's running one of them. He's not doing a very good job. Lots and lots of complaints from the customers, and this seems mostly to be because he doesn't really want to spend his time working in the shop. He would much prefer to be upstairs, spending time with his new wife. His wife goes against a lot of the stereotypes that we might have had. She's not meek, she's not submissive, she's not respectful of her elders. She runs her own business. It's a dating website. She dresses in a multicultural way. She wears a tartan sari. She's got short red hair. She's not what we'd expect. And she also mocks his dad, swears at his mum. She's very much challenging those stereotypes and sort of seems more dominant in the marriage at times. The speaker in the poem seems to feel happiest when the shop is shut and he's not having to do that kind of work, and instead he can just spend quality time with his wife. That seems to be what he's most interested in doing. We touch on the different AO1 feelings and ideas. Just want to sort of mention this concept. So capitalism, in a simplest sense, capitalism is an economic system where an individual can earn more money for themselves through hard work, and that your motivation is that you do better in your job, you get more money for yourself, and then you can buy nice things. So we've got this idea in the background of capitalism, which particularly relates to the speaker's parents. So the thoughts and feelings, this is going to get me my AO1 marks. The first one, the speaker rejects the capitalist values of his father. So we get in the poem a sense that the speaker does not have the same drive and determination to be successful as his father clearly did, as he owns a chain of shops and is clearly a very successful businessman. That seems to be something that the speaker's lacking. Picked up in a quote, you want me not to have a break, but when nobody's in I do the lock. So this idea that his father doesn't want him to stop working. He should be really focused and hard working and working all the time, but he doesn't want to feel like that. He doesn't want to do that. And whenever he gets the chance, he locks up the shop, which is something that his dad wouldn't be pleased with. And then also this repeated idea of the customers, hey Singh, where you been? That he's not doing the work he should be doing, that they notice he's missing, they can't get in the shop, they can't buy things, and that seems to be something that his dad would disagree with and not like. Fundamentally, that is because the speaker is more interested in love than money. So, because up the stairs is my newly bride, this idea that he just wants to be upstairs with his wife. This marriage is relatively new and he wants to spend time with her. And then part of that conversation that we get at the end of the poem from the story each night, I say it's half the cost of you, baby. So this idea that they're deeply in love and that everything else is less important than the time they spend together. Moving on to AO2, because this poem, part of the thing that's really useful about it is that it covers both parental and romantic elements. There are 2 AO2 quotes to depend on whether you're going to use it to compare to a parental poem like Mother Any Distance or Before You Were Mine, or whether you're going to compare it to something more romantic like Sonnet 29 or Winter Swans. So starting off with this one, this is a quote that I would use if I was comparing it to another parental poem or looking at the theme of sort of relationships of family. So I run just one of my daddy's shops from 9 o'clock to 9 o'clock. So first things first, the adverb just in the quote. I run just one of my daddy's shops. There seems to be an expectation that he should be running more than one. There's a suggestion, I think, that he's got siblings and that they have more than one, because he sees it as just one. And I think this might be a reflection on the fact that he's a poor shopkeeper. So after we hear him say that line, we then realise that the customers aren't happy, he doesn't clean the floor, he hasn't got the stock in, and that we kind of better understand why he only runs one of the shops. There's also this suggestion that we're able to infer that potentially he's a bit of a disappointment to his family. His dad is clearly incredibly successful and maybe hoped that his son would, follow in those footsteps and go on to be equally successful, and that seems to not be the case. So just on that little word, we're able to sort of interpret quite a lot. The name Daddy's, this is not his shop, so we definitely sort of better understand why he's got limited motivation, because he's not independent. It's not his shop to run as he seems fit. It seems that his dad has this capitalist motivation, this desire to earn more money and be more successful, and the speaker is very much lacking in that motivation. The word daddy's also makes him seem a little bit immature, a little bit childish. He's maybe not ready to run a business. Maybe this is too early for him. Possibly he'd be more successful if he was given more time to get a little bit older. But that's not been allowed, and he's running this shop and not doing a great job of it. And then lastly, this phrase, this time phrase, from 9 o'clock to 9 o'clock. Now those are clearly what his dad expects, probably what his dad does himself, or certainly did when he first set up the business. It's hard, it's long, and it's boring. Running a shop for 12 hours would not be a really fun, interesting thing to do. He really is entitled to breaks, but his dad doesn't seem to want him to have that. And again, that's linking back to these capitalist motivations that his dad seems to have, representing those ideas of first generation immigrants moving to Britain and seeing it as a real opportunity to sort of make some money and own something of their own. And because he's the child of the first generation immigrant, he's lacking those motivations for whatever reason, and it sort of helps us to understand how he's very different to his own dad. And also 9 to 9 is going to leave you very little time for your own life, your own relationship. And in the poem, we hear about them going downstairs, him and his wife, at midnight, after he's sort of finished his work. And so maybe this is a reflection of his lack of interest in the shop and more interest in his own life. He doesn't want to be away from her for 12 hours. Okay, so here's the second AO2. So this is more if I'm using it to compare to a romantic poem. So tiny eyes of a gun and the tummy of a teddy. Unusual couple of metaphors. Okay, so, and this applies to the previous quote. it's written phonetically, this poem, to create the character of the shopkeeper as a speaker with English as an additional language, probably speaks Punjabi as his first language. But when we bring in the phonetical language, the reference to daddy, this reference to the teddy, he doesn't always sound like the most clever or most mature character. And I think that's part of what Nagra's trying to create and make him funny and silly. But we could talk about that with this quote. The gun is a metaphor for his wife. It's her eyes that are compared to the gun, and this suggests that she can hurt him with a look. You know, she's like give him evils with her eyes, and that's upsetting for him. It also makes her seem maybe more dominant. There are other things with that as well, like maybe where she's taking the mick out of his dad or swearing at his mom. She seems to be quite dominant, and that subverts the stereotype of the submissive Asian woman. And she really represents the merging of different cultures. She's an interesting sort of character in that respect. We've also got a juxtaposition, so a strong contrast between the metaphor of the teddy, so the two metaphors next to each other, sort of ones that we wouldn't necessarily put together. So she's got two sides to her character. She can be confrontational, which is represented through the metaphor of the gun, but she can also be kind and comforting, which is here in this metaphor of the teddy. So like I say, a teddy could be used to comfort a child, and he sees her in a positive light. He sees her as something reassuring and comforting and supporting. There's also something in the noun tummy, the tummy of a teddy, which suggests that maybe she's got a more rounded stomach, not fat shaming, she's just slightly more rounded, good for her. But he doesn't seem to care about that. He doesn't see that as a negative thing. I think maybe he's less interested in her physical appearance. He loves her for who she is. It doesn't really matter what she looks like. He just loves her.